Guys, I'm Kennedy. I'm an alcoholic and an addict.
Hey, Kennedy. Hi, Kennedy.
Here we go, day 2 at the camp out. Let's start this off with a moment of silent meditation followed by the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay, here we go. If you're listening to this, we don't have 1, 2, and 3 because we messed it up yesterday, but we're going to go right into 4 and 5. Right? Yeah. Yesterday we had the Long Island People's Talk on 1, 2, and 3. Today we're going to do 4 and 5 now, and then we're going to do 6, 7, 8, 9 tomorrow. 6, 7, 8, 9 tonight, and then 10, 11, 12 tomorrow. This is the first annual New York State Unity Campout thing. You guys all came. You guys are all wonderful. There's plenty of campsites around here. We have the whole place to ourselves. We're bonding, with people from other areas. It's pretty cool. I'm happy you guys all came. It's fucking I'm cursing. It's a God-centered place right here, I feel like, too, which is kind of cool. We just did a meditation. It was nice. And now, we have speakers from the Capital District. And our first speaker speaking on steps 4 and 5 is going to be Mariah. So with that, I give you Mariah. Yay.
My name's Mariah, and I'm an addict.
Hi, Mariah.
Can I just put this down here? Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, we're from the Bundles of Hope group of HA in Mechanicville, New York, which is right near Albany. I thought I was just sharing on the 4 steps, so I'm just going to share on the 4 step if that's all right. Larry can kick it with the 5th step. But also, I want to just qualify, a little bit about, how I ended up here and why I'm here talking about the 4 step. Like I said, I'm an addict, and I know, I'll share my story for 5 minutes or something like that, and I think it's valuable to share my story, not only to qualify or remind myself or let you know who I am or where I came from, but, that's all I had when I came here, you know what I mean? It's my story, my baggage, my shit. I got clean when I was 22, and I started using super young. Same kind of feelings that a lot of people have. I felt really uncomfortable in my own skin since as long as I could remember. I'm a firm believer that I came out of the box this way, that I was already busted. Environment certainly didn't help, but I felt weird from the get-go. I was really awkward and uncomfortable, and I come from a big family, and my mom is severely and persistently mentally ill, and so everybody in my family, we'd spent a lot of time looking at each other, the kids, and being who's going to turn out like her? And nobody wanted to turn out like her, of course. So we all turned out addicts. We're all a bunch of addicts and alcoholics. So I found drugs when I was 11, 12. I started doing hard drugs. They were available to me in my home. And part of, my addiction and stuff like that started then, or kind of kicked off then, because I was selling drugs. I really liked money even at a young age. I was really into money and having some sort of identity. And when I found drugs, it was thank God, and I say that all the time, is that I don't think I would have made it through my teenage years. Had I not found drugs, I think I would have killed myself. So I'm actually grateful. I had absolutely no interests, no direction. I wasn't really good at anything. And I was good at drugs. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. I had, instant kind of a lifestyle and friends. And I could, disappear whenever I needed to. Or, get high and feel, on top of the world or whatever. And they worked. They worked for a long time for me. Like I said, I feel like I came out of the box like this. I used alcoholically or an addict from the beginning. I could have qualified for any number of 12-step programs when I was probably by the time I was 13 years old. So I started to get into trouble. There's consequences. I dropped out of school after the 8th grade, and and that was always like a hard thing for me because I felt like I was an idiot or not smart or not good enough. It just kind of fed the whole negative self-talk that I had all my life anyway. But really, like I said, drugs worked. That's the thing about using for me is that the consequences will never stop me from using. It didn't matter what the consequences were. I had consequences the first time I, got drunk. I probably threw up all over the place. That did not matter to me at all. I still continue to do it for a whole bunch of reasons, but, especially because it worked, because I didn't give a shit how shitty I had made my life because it was high. That's all I wanted to do. So consequences started coming. I started getting arrested and stuff when I was like 16. I dropped out of school. I traveled around the country. I lived in a van. I'm the youngest out of 5 kids, so my parents were kind of like, they're going to do what they want to do anyway. Let her do what she's going to do. And I came into recovery when I was 22. And through the court system, I had gotten arrested again, and I couldn't show up to pretrial probation clean. I could not get even 3 days. I was detoxing myself at home a lot. I was making myself sick a lot. At that time, it was before Suboxone was available or anything like that. And I was putting myself through a lot of pain, and it was just over and over again to stop using, start using again, stop using, start using again. So anyway, I went to treatment to try to get out of trouble. I went to detox because I couldn't get to pretrial probation, and I liked it. I felt like kind of good. I mean, I was terrified, but I had some freedom that I had never had before, and it kind of put like a stop in that cycle of just like, using and then trying to get clean and trying to figure out some combination that would work for me of, maybe pot, maybe alcohol, maybe just try not to use heroin or, smoke crack with your heroin and then you'll feel, even more or whatever. Just, doing anything. So I got clean and went to treatment, started going to meetings, got a sponsor. I was really terrified the first couple years to use again. I lost a lot of people at that time, which I'm sure that we all have at this point. Heroin is a killer. There's no old folks home full of heroin addicts. You know what I mean? You either die or you end up here or in prison. So I lost a lot of friends. That's when I was like 22, 23. Did some steps, went back to school, got a degree. Life got really good, and I had a lot of freedom, traveled a lot. Life was really good. And then I started to kind of drift from the program. I was in a advanced, I was advancing my career and my education. I started hanging out with like doctors and nurse practitioners, and I stopped telling people why I didn't go out drinking with them. And that was like one of the first things that I started doing. And at that point I had 8 years clean. And I felt like maybe the thought came into my head that I never had the opportunity to successfully drink or try to be normal because I started so young. So that's how it started. It's not that I wanted to use by any stretch because that's not how my disease works. It's not so obvious like that, especially after being clean 8 years. My disease was smarter than that, knew I wouldn't be hearing that. So I kind of drifted from the meetings and the program. I stopped sponsoring people, stopped doing service, and like I said, started hanging out with like normal people, and that's really what I always wanted. I always wanted like people to accept me for who I was, but I always, I just wanted my people, and I had found them in, the program in recovery, but then drifted from them, so I had like no one. So I stopped telling people that I was an addict or an alcoholic or whatever, and started hanging out with people, and started thinking about maybe I could do this right. Maybe I could actually maybe I made too much of this, whole thing or whatever when I was younger. And eventually I started making really bad decisions and I drank, and the thing I always say this too, the worst thing that can ever happen to an addict or alcoholic after recovery when they pick up is nothing. And nothing happens, I didn't all of a sudden start shooting dope that night and my life fall apart or anything like that. It wasn't like that at all. Nothing happened. And I was like, oh, see, I was right. I'm not like you people. I'm not a real addict, actually. Now I just drink socially. And, I successfully drank for like a couple years or whatever. I had a couple good years of drinking, I guess, left in me. But I did not have any good years of using left in me. And it brought me to the same place that I had been before. It took a couple years, but I ended up, using dope, whatever I could get my hands on. By this point, I'm a registered nurse. I have access to a lot of medications and started diverting meds. Started selling drugs again to support my habit. And the scary part about, going out and using again and ending up like in that same like terrible place where you were the first time around, there's so much shame and guilt because you know that there's something better, but I could not get back here. It took me like 7 years to get back here and stay. And it was excruciating. I could not any longer live with or without drugs. The drugs were not working. I was not getting high anymore, but I could not use them. And it was just like a painful couple years of like detoxing myself. Same situation as what was when I was younger. But all this time I have the knowledge that like I was free. You know what I mean? Like I had freedom before and I messed it up or whatever. So it was a lot of shame. I was really angry when I came back in. I couldn't even speak in meetings for definitely a couple months. I actually just celebrated my 1 year back, and I hadn't gotten any chips or tokens or key tags or anything because I could not like stand up and say that I had 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. It was too uncomfortable for me. I also did not want to hear, like my first 30, 60 days, I didn't want to hear anything from anybody unless you had 8 or 9 years at least. You know what I mean? Because you can't tell me anything because I knew everything. You know what I mean? And I still had that sick brain that, I could somehow cob job and get it together, And, I mean, my ego deflation habit started at that point. You know what I mean? Like, by coming back in. I'm so grateful for the gift of desperation that I had because it was really hard for me to hit a bottom now that I have, like, resources and money and enablers and stuff like that. When I was younger, I didn't have anything. There was an end to my using because I ran out of money. This time around, it was like, the sky's the limit. So it was hard for me to hit a bottom. I had to get rid of everything myself intentionally in order to like have nothing and be able to be humble. My natural state is not humbled. You know what I mean? My natural state is a fear-based state where I like to be all grandiose and fill in all those holes with character defects and feel better about myself. So I got clean again. And life has been good, I've done my steps again now with a sponsor. I jumped right into step work, really only because I kind of wanted to date, so I wanted to get my 4th step out of the way, and I was like, well, I gotta get this ball rolling here, you know what I mean? And thank God that like urge has left me and stuff like that. Like I'm totally just like, it doesn't matter if it ever happens for me. But that's truly why I started doing step work again. I wanted some relief. I remembered the relief that I had in the 4th step my first time around. I really loved my 4th step. It was like magic to me. The freedom from not only resentments, but to be like one of like many, you know what I mean? To be a person, a human being, and not be, like fighting with the too big, too little thing that I had lived with all my life. Faking who I was, never feeling good enough, no matter how much good stuff I did. I always just felt like a piece of crap. You know what I mean? It didn't matter what I did. So I did another 4th step with my sponsor. I was telling somebody here earlier, I had a hard time when I, was doing my 4th step this time, identifying resentments at first. They were like, oh, resentments, list them. And I was like, I don't really have resentments. I don't think I have any. I think I took care of them all my first time around. And I did take care of some of them my first time around. There was the big ones, my mom and stuff like that. To be able to forgive her and see her as a sick and suffering human being that did the best that she could with us, in spite of, the other story that I had told myself, which was that, I had this terrible mentally ill mother that was abusive and poor me, and I couldn't stand her. To be able to actually say, like, and feel in my heart, like, I love her for being a human being, aside from being my mother. Up until that point, I had been nasty to her. I would treat a bum on the street better than I treated my own mother. I felt very guilty for that. So in doing my inventory this time, I like the inventory as it's outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is part of the reason why I like this fellowship so much, because I've always identified as an addict, and, I don't use alcohol or anything like that, but I like the steps out of the Big Book. I like the literature out of the Big Book. So I kind of was always, trying to find my little home and stuff like that. And I like HA meetings a lot for that. I like doing my steps out of the Big Book. So I did my steps with a sponsor, the columns. I'm resentful at, so-and-so. They did such and such. And, what did it affect? Usually for me, it's like the same stuff over and over and over again. It's like, I would like to say my first 4-step, I said, I was resentful at my mom, she was abusive to me, and what did it affect? And I was like, oh, my security, it affected my security because I was a little kid and I wanted love from her and stuff like that. And that's true. But then the next part of it is what I really like is like, what was my part in it? Sure, when I'm a baby and my mom's whatever, doing whatever, I don't have a part in that. But my part was the response to it, was me talking about her, me using that as an excuse to have bad behavior or whatever. And to be able to have the power to change that, whole perspective was just like, I don't know, it was just life-changing for me. And also, for me, the next part of that is the fear, you know what I mean? Like, is what was I afraid of? I was afraid of that I wasn't going to get the love that I felt like I needed and deserved from a parent, but I was also afraid that I was going to turn out like my mom. That's what I was so freaking angry about. I was worried about being the crazy lady, and I was the crazy lady. That's the thing. That's what I was turning out to be. So a lot of freedom there. So my 4-step this time was a little different. I was saying earlier, my sponsor asked me, because I was like, I don't know about resentments. I felt like I learned how to deal with them in the first time around. And any of them that didn't go away from doing that process, like almost like immediately, really, when you see the patterns of your behavior and why you acted that way, or why I acted that way, I should say. You pray about the instructions are to pray about it, and that's worked for me when I wanted to be rid of it. And that was the key for me. There was a couple resentments I wasn't ready to let go of. And so, today I try not to show up for unnecessary pain. Like, I don't need to have that anymore in my life. I don't need that excuse to be like a bad person, to be like, and also I'm getting way too old to blame anything on my parents, that's for sure. It just starts to look really weird. But, to blame anything on a boyfriend or to blame anything on a situation or my job or whatever, fill in the blank with whatever it might be. So I did the columns again. I'm resentful at so-and-so. My sponsor said to me, if you can't think of them as resentments, who do you feel smugly superior then? And I was like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? I was saying, like, first of all, you for bringing that up, because that's my thing. I can switch things around in my head, and we're smart people, we're resourceful people. We wouldn't be alive and we wouldn't have made it this far if we weren't able to, dope fiend and hustle our way through life. And that's what I do in my head with stuff. That's my natural thing, is to all right, let me fix this up and wrap this in a package that's palatable to me. So going through the columns, like I said, for me, life-changing. I sit down and pray about something before I do any step work. I do work with a sponsor. We're not like best friends, you know what I mean? Like, that's my relationship with my sponsor. Everybody has a different relationship with theirs, but I just really wanted somebody to take me through the steps, and so I could help other people also, and not feel the way that I was feeling, and hopefully not pick up. So going through the columns, they all ended up, in fear, and then I did, a fear inventory, just a special to fear. But really, the last part of the columns were what was so telling to me is that, every time somebody walked into a room and I didn't like them, or every time I just, somebody rubbed me the wrong way, 9 times out of 10, it is not about what they're saying or doing or anything like that. It's about me afraid of not getting what I think I need. Pretty girl walks into the room and I'm like, oh, bitch. And I'm like, the only reason why I'm upset about that is because I feel like I'm not going to get the love and attention that I need, and I'm not counting on my higher power or, the group or whatever, your concept of God is to you. I'm not counting that there is a plan for me and that I have been provided with everything that I need up until this point, always in my life. I have, I'm okay. I have 10 fingers and 10 toes. Stuff has happened that's not been so great, but I'm always taken care of. And the other side of that is that when I feel afraid that I'm not going to get what I think I need, then I act out on character defects and stuff like that. Then I start with the resentments and operating out of a place of fear. And, and the cycle continues with that. But just seeing that was important to me. And also all the other, the things that I can be afraid of that I would never even think anybody could be afraid of. You know, I was stealing because I was scared that I wouldn't have enough. You know what I mean? Like, everything just for me goes back to fear. I did do a separate like sex inventory. It was a lot smaller than my first one, which I was really proud of. My first one was just like, it was just a lot. You know, nameless, faceless, you know what I mean? Like, I just didn't even know. I was younger. I did a lot of stuff. But this one was just more succinct and more about the actual relationships that I had been in and how I, you know, show up, you know, acting as if I'm this giving, like, loving person and I want to just do good. And it's complete manipulation. I'm a complete master manipulator. I am trying to trick you into being with me or to falling in love with me or whatever it is. And I will put a lot of work into that manipulation. You know what I mean? It's like a full-time job for me. I have definitely, you know, had some experience with, you know, doing some damage, you know, in my personal relationships one-on-one. And I don't want to live like that. It never gets me what I need. You know, I usually do win the person. I get the prize. I get what I think I want or what I think I need. And it turns out that I have no idea what I need. You know, that my best thinking really, like if I see somebody across a crowded room and I'm like, God, that guy is just like really good looking. He just makes me feel a certain way. That is the worst person for me. That is definitely a mentally ill person. Something is really wrong with them. And I need to stay as far away from them as possible. And I actually do that today. You know what I mean? Like intentionally, you know, I can pray about something, but if I feel some kind of way, I'm like, you know, let me just see how things, let me not get in it. You know what I mean? And if things are meant to be, they're meant to be. It's the same with like work and everything like that. Like I just can't live a fear-based life anymore. You know, and out of that fourth step in doing an inventory, you know, like I said, with the columns and things like that, identifying my fears, praying and having faith in the program or higher power, kind of took care of a lot of that. And, you know, I still have some stuff. I definitely still have some stuff. But I have some tools to use to kind of fix me. And I didn't really understand my first time around, maybe because I was young or I wasn't ready or whatever. I didn't understand why I was still coming to, you know, meetings and doing work after years and years clean, because my life seemed, you know, was pretty good and stuff like that. And I ended up becoming the same Mariah that like stuck a needle in her arm so long ago, and then eventually using. And I know now, you know, that I need to become a different person, and that's only a daily thing. It never gets like done. You know, if I stop doing the work, it can definitely get undone. I've seen myself do it. Before I picked up, you know, after that long clean time, I was doing stuff clean that most people don't even do using. I mean, I was, you know, not trying to go straight to the drugs. I tried everything else first. But the program, you know what I mean, but surrender, and it turns out that I need to be beaten into submission to become willing to do this work. But like I said, I'm grateful for the gift of desperation that I got last year. I don't know what was different this time that I ended up sticking around, and I'm grateful for my year back. You know, I know by any stretch I'm not like out of the woods, everything's not great, or anything like that. You know, not perfect, I should say. It is great. It is great. Everything is pretty great. You know, and there was a lot of good stuff that just happened organically from putting down drugs, obviously, that happens with all of us. But feeling like comfortable and at peace was something that I didn't know that I would ever be able to have again, because it was so hard to come back. I just thought maybe I had lost my mind and that was the end of the story for me. And I'm grateful now to realize, like, I don't know the end of the story for me at all. So yeah, you know, I'm so happy that this camp out is happening, and I'm sorry that I didn't get to come and experience the whole thing. There's a lot of campouts going on right now, so it's like every weekend I feel like is some sort of event, which is great, because a year and a half ago, I mean, I didn't want to look at people, talk to people, or leave my house, really. You know, the freedom that comes with recovery is also addictive, and I would like to continue to do the work and continue to, like, you know, show up at places where I don't know anybody, and I'm like, that's going to be weird, you know. So I can keep getting more freedom, you know. That's what I'm looking for now. It's just, I'm always going to be looking for more of something, and I like feeling this way. You know, it feels good. Not that it's good every day. I was telling him in the car on the way down here, I had a close acquaintance, my ex-boyfriend from using and stuff the last 3 years. killed himself last week, and it was like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And like I said, I've lost a lot of people, but this disease, and this recovery, this second chance that I've got, a lot of people aren't ever going to get it, and I didn't understand my first time around. I didn't understand relapse at all because I was so young when I got clean, and I just didn't get it. And now I do, and I have more compassion because of that. So, I don't know. I just wanted to share that, just to kind of let it go again. It's like my first day that I haven't bawled crying, so I'm really happy about that and hope it continues. But yeah, I don't know. I think I used to cry every day like a couple years ago, so it's still better. Anyway, I hope somebody got something out of what I say. And if you're scared of the 4-step, don't be. It's like, I love it. I like all the time and doing inventories now. They say you can clean it up with your 10-step, but I feel like the 10-step is kind of like a light version. I like doing like the real, seeing at the root of things. If I feel uncomfortable, I can always go back to it. So I'm going to stop talking now. I don't know how long it's been, but thank you so much for inviting us to share.
Thank you, Mariah. That was excellent. Next, who's going to talk on the 5th step is going to be Larry from the Capital District, right?
Yes, sir.
Here we go. Here's Larry, everyone.
Good morning. My name is Larry, and I'm a junkie of sustained sobriety.
Hey, Larry. Hi, Larry.
A little bit nervous. I figured I'd start off with saying that I have a sponsor. My clean date is April 23rd, 2016. I have a home group, commitments, and I network as much as possible. I also try to sponsor people, but sponsees are flighty at best sometimes. but the willingness is definitely there. I'll start off with a little bit of my story. I believe that since there's no one from the Capital District besides the people that I brought that haven't heard my story, so I'll share a little bit of that. I believe that I've been through a lot of 12-step meetings, and there's usually somebody when the speaker speaks. There's usually like some kind of ingredients that led up to their using. And I had a similar experience. My childhood was, less than savory, and this led up to me wanting to escape. And some of that stuff was, my parents were divorced, going back and forth between parents. But my mother is the one who I basically stayed with, and she was verbally, physically abusive at times. She sent me through Catholic school, which was. I got bullied a lot, so that was something that really affected me as a social person. It was very hard for me to be social, and I had less than savory babysitters at times because my mother was a single parent, and I was molested at a young age. So all of this stuff kind of like added up to a point where I wanted to escape these feelings, and I didn't know how. A lot of it was isolation at first, and just being friends with Scooby-Doo on TV because that's what we were watching. And it just the first time I got drunk was at my father's second wedding, and I was 11 years old. And I finished everybody's wine, and I felt completely different. Like I just came out of this box, and I was dancing around and talking to people and sociable, and just a totally different person. And it really didn't continue on from there, but like the seed had been planted that this was the way I can get out. This is the way I could escape from the recluse, scared boy that I was. And when I finally went to public school, I was no longer a misfit. I was like the misfit in Catholic school. I found other misfits in public school. There was like a group of us, and we were all, using drugs, mainly marijuana, but some psychedelics, and eventually, and I had a really good time. Like that was key, is that like I had a really good time, because in my later in life, I would use that as a way to try to go back to having a good time when things weren't good. Like I remembered the good time, even though it was hard to remember the pain that it led to. And so eventually I started shooting heroin when I was 18, and that was even a good time. And the reason why, I started shooting heroin was because of, I'd see like these movies and they made it look glamorous. And I wanted to experience that because I was an extremist, and I wanted to push everything to the edge. So I'm like, if I'm going to do heroin, I'm going to do it right the first time. And I shot up, and it was magical, as we all know. But the magic is like this thing that I can't wield. It's like this magic that I can't wield, and it's black, it's dark. It gets really dark. So like I said, it was fun for a couple years. It was just like another drug where I used it on occasion for a couple years. And then I went to a festival, and like a lot of stories you hear, it turned into pills came into play, opiate pills came into play. And I started abusing them at this festival. Pills run out and they get too expensive, so like conveniently or unconveniently, however you want to look at it, it seemed convenient at the time. A friend of mine was selling heroin, and he delivered to my house, to me and my best friend, for a year. And I never knew anything more, because like I was a drug dealer, I was a pot dealer, so it was just like I had the money, and I was paying full price, and just going in on it, really. Eventually the money ran out, and I started owing people money, and I lost my apartment, I lost my car for the first time. I got arrested, and I was on probation for misdemeanor charges, and probation really tried their best to get me sober. They never violated me, but I relapsed a bunch of times, and in that time it just kept on getting progressively harder and harder, the programs that they would put me in. First it was like a couple days a week, and then we all know how it goes. I'm doing 14 months at a therapeutic community because of my heroin addiction. And so it progressed very, very, very quickly as soon as I knew what the habit was and knew what being sick was, and I couldn't not be sick. And I didn't know why I kept on using, because I would have time clean and I would relapse, and I started to call myself a chronic relapser when I learned that term in the programs that I was going to. Later in life, I had to learn how to change that thought and change that speaking, because I was just going to be a chronic relapser for the rest of my life until I changed that thought and changed the speaking. Changed the way I thought about myself. So I'd come out of a program and got involved in a 12-step, and this was key because I felt like it failed me. So it was very difficult to get back into another 12-step program. And because I bought into it, I really got involved with the program. And I'm not going to get into specifics because of this recording, but I was involved, and I really felt that it had failed me because I had relapsed, and I had no idea why I was relapsing. And it was really, I was trying to escape still. Whenever I got clean, the thoughts and the feelings of being that little boy, I would want to escape that stuff. And then responsibility kicked in, because the first few times I got sober, sobriety hit me with gifts really quickly. And too much responsibility at once for me was I needed to escape that. so I would use, and this is after like hindsight, of course, because I wasn't thinking about this at the time, but thinking back at it, hindsight is just like, yeah, this is why I was getting high, because I didn't want to pay bills, I didn't want to, go to work, I didn't know how to have fun other than using drugs. So this time I'm gonna skip to like this time coming in. Prison is definitely a part of my story. I've been in and out a few times because of relapsing, and the relapsing in the end was just trying my own way. Because I gave up on the 12-step programs, so I would just try it my own way, like just getting a therapist, or just like trying religion or spirituality on my own, and just different things, and it never worked. I really needed to connect with other heroin addicts. And jumping to this last relapse, like I was really, really hopeless. I found myself on top of a bridge, smoking cigarettes, high, being too scared to jump, and not knowing how to live at all, and just having that complete hopelessness. And I had told parole that I was dirty, and they sent me to a crisis center. And from then on, it was like a different recovery for me. It was a different process. There was no gifts right away. It was like I had to work for my gifts, but I had this idea of taking my time and just not manipulating and doing it right. And I found my sponsor while in my first couple weeks in that crisis center, and he's still my sponsor today. And so jumping into the 5th step, doing this step with my sponsor, and doing the steps correctly, again for once, just knowing that I had to do what I saw other people doing that were successful, and that was 12-step program, going to meetings and getting connected. And so I decided finally to do that. And the 5th step, the 4th step, I'll just jump back a little bit, was easy for me. The 4th step was just like, all right, I'm writing stuff down. I did a 300-page autobiography while I was in prison, so I can write. Like, I have no problem writing. It was like the 5th step was the scary shit, because I did not want to talk about the shit that I was writing about. And because I had this like idea that I was unique, that I was like, they call it chronic uniqueness or whatever. If you're, been around for a while, you might have heard that, or terminal uniqueness. And like I definitely had that. That was me. And it was very difficult for me to sit down and tell somebody what I had written in my 4th step. And I think Mariah went really well over the 4th step. So my experience was that after writing the 4th step, I took my sponsor into like a nature preserve sanctuary, quite like this, and we sat on a bench, and I read my 4th step for a couple hours, and the stuff that I thought was the worst stuff, and like I'll share a little bit about it so people can relate. It turned out that there had been other people that had done the same thing, and I'm not unique in any kind of way. And like some of the hardest things to do was, before I came in at my bottom, I have found myself in a situation where it took 18 years to get to this point. Like, I've been using junk for 18 years. And on and off. It took 18 years to get to this point, but I found myself accepting money for sexual behaviors. And that could not bring myself to tell somebody that shit. And thank God, like, I didn't disgrace myself too much, but still it brought me to a point where I knew it was going to get worse if I didn't stop. So that was like, it's one of the hardest things I had to admit. And it's still hard to admit today to you guys, even though I know that there's probably people in here through experience that have had the same experience. So it's not like I'm not unique. Like this shit happens. And the hardest thing was that I was using with my sister, and she was quite younger. She was probably 20 at the time, and I was around 30. And I had gotten sober for a time, and she did not, and ended up overdosing on heroin and passing away. And like I really felt like this was the most dirtbag shit that I could possibly have to tell somebody. And it hurt so bad to have to admit to that to people. And I stayed sober for about 3 months after, and then I used it as an excuse to get high, and I probably used it as an excuse to escape more times after that. And it turns out, like, hearing people's stories and sharing that, people come up to me after a meeting and it's like, yo, thank you for sharing that because I thought that I was the only one. Or, thank you because, my best friend died because I had turned him or her on, or my cousin, or whatever, whatever the situation might be. And I wasn't the only one. And through telling this stuff to a sponsor, made it easier to share it at meetings and hear this connection with the people that, you guys, the people I need to connect with, the people that I needed to, like, get involved with. And it lost power over me. And what I mean by power is the grip that the heroin addiction had that made me want to use because of this shit. And it really just, like, I can say it now and it's still uncomfortable, but I know that people understand. And that's why I'm so grateful for Heroin Anonymous specifically, for the specialty 12-step group, is because, like, I can say exactly what was going on in my experience because heroin was my drug of choice. And people nod their heads or, laugh because they're relating or whatever. And the bottom line is that I had given up on other 12-step programs, and it gave me something new and fresh to come to and try the steps again and almost be excited over. I was kind of excited to come in and meet new people and go through this and have, the sobriety and the opportunities that I hadn't been afforded while I was getting high. And the losses that I've had, I don't lose things anymore. The gifts of sobriety come to me a little bit at a time, slowly, thank God, so I can manage it. And it's like, wow, now I can drive out here to, sit with you guys and share my experience and hopefully, like, help somebody that, might have similar experiences and give hope. Because, like I said, I was completely hopeless, and, Heroin Anonymous has definitely put hope in my life. And I think that was the most important part. And, like, working the steps was a key part of gaining that experience. There's I don't know. I feel that, I'm very grateful to be here. And, when I had the opportunity to speak, I jumped on it just to, give the message to the next person. Because that's what really keeps me sober. And talking about the 5th step being one of the hardest steps that I had to go through was a gift, because, like, I realized that, through this process and being relieved of all that pressure and that I was holding in and bottling up, that I really needed to release all that stuff in order to move on. And I'm just gonna, like, end it there. Thank you guys for being here, and I really appreciate this stuff, man. This is great.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Mariah. You guys are awesome. Thank you for coming out here and speaking on 4 and 5. You guys are fabulous, coming from Albany. And I think we have a nice way to close. We're going to close with a moment of silence followed by the Serenity Prayer again. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.